Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to all of my viewers, and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to my guest today, Brother Robert from Canada.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How are you doing, Brother Assad? Thank you so much for having me on.
No. Anytime. What's it called? It just so happened that I had a Sheikh Abdullah Ayaz from Toronto on, last week. I believe it was last Sunday, and you came up at the end of the discussion, and I was like, I've been, following him on Twitter. I was like, I have to have him on. I like his views. They're very different than my own. I was like, but they come from a earnest spot, like, honesty and humbleness. They don't come from any sort of weird spot or anything like this. I was like, I have to have him on, and I gotta hear what Brother Robert has to say.
Wow. Okay. All right. Well, that's pretty high praise. I don't know if I've met this brother before in Toronto, but I appreciate the endorsement. And I knew that after taking these positions after many years of being a convert, that there would be, I guess, I don't know, opposition to it, reluctance, and I knew that would come with the territory. But that's good because it challenges my viewpoints and forces me to intellectualize counterpoints to what people say about it. So
Alhamdulillah. But what's it called? So, I had on before that, last Thursday, I had on an Imam, Sheikh John, and we discussed some of the things, the name and different things like that. And one of the things which we discussed was, he used to go by Yahya, and then he started going by John. And for a lot of us, it was a little bit odd. We're like, all of a sudden he's John now, and there was a brother, a local brother. He had converted, and when he converted, he changed his name. He didn't really like his name. His name used to be Derek, and he changed to Dawood. And when he changed to Dawood, Imam John came and he started calling him David. And Dawood is really confused. He's like, "Why does he keep calling me David?" And he told him, he's like, "My name's not David, it's Derek." And and so he was trying to explain to him the concept of why he should continue to use his name that his parents gave him for the purpose of dawah. And at that time, maybe it didn't make as much sense. But later on, as we moved along, 10 years, this has been 10 years since that interaction. Slowly over time, it's made more sense to me. And I think it's the process of understanding, coming from coming to Islam from a European American background or European Canadian background. For a lot of us, it doesn't make a lot of sense a lot of times.
yeah. Well, yeah, and I don't remember when I first converted too. I thought I had to change my name, like that. That was a misconception that I had. So I had, they basically picked a Muslim name out of thin air, and then years down the road, I thought, yeah, I mean, this is just not really productive. I mean, and we'll get into this a little bit later, but I mean, there's just the number of barriers, between Islam and the Anglosphere. It's just they're very vast and they go very deep. So I mean, in our case, like, why add an extra barrier? And I know it may seem ridiculous to many people who aren't in that situation, or even for a lot of converts as well, because a lot of converts come with so much zeal, and for the ones who are more well adjusted, their parents didn't have a problem with their conversion. But for a lot of people who are from a European background who are interested in Islam, a lot of the times it's not accepting whether or not Islam is the truth. It's actually like declaring it publicly. So that's I think you're seeing a selection bias of of the people from those backgrounds who are converting. It's usually either their family and community has been very accepting of it, or their family community has completely rejected them. Usually never in between. And then years down the road, you see like the negative effects of like going too hard and putting up so many barriers that your community doesn't recognize you anymore.
Yeah, no, I completely understand that. And I was having a discussion with a brother. He's come from an African American background. And I'm like, the challenges you brothers face and the brothers and sisters from the African American background face are much different than the challenges, a person from your background faces.
It's
Everybody has their own.
qualitatively different. Yeah.
Yeah, it's totally different. The background, culture, different things like that play into it. Where for a lot of people who are from African American descent, becoming Muslim isn't as much of a challenge. Their family still might pose a lot of, opposition to it, but it's not as much opposition as I think a lot of times the European Americans or European Canadians or just in general people who come from a Eurocentric background they face. It's like a different level of challenges.
Yeah, I mean, they have, several heroes that they can draw from and that are, you know, not just well known in the African American community, but worldwide. I mean, you have Muhammad Ali, you have Malcolm X, and the African American experience of coming to Islam en masse, was such a vital story for them, that everyone that people around America know of that story and that struggle. So it's almost like converting to Islam for them is almost like a rite of passage. Whereas for us, and again, what they have gone through in terms of being under the shadow of another people. I mean, that's an unbelievable challenge in and of itself. I wouldn't know, I wouldn't know the first thing about that.
Yeah.
But I think for us from Muslims from a European background, it's we were the historical enemy of Islam. Islam and Europe were at each other's throats for centuries. And then in contemporary times, you have the war on terror and 9/11, and like decades of propaganda and Hollywood and things like that. So like it's pretty obvious that converting is you're a converso. I mean, you've rejected your identity, your family, and your community by converting to Islam.
Yeah.
So I guess the big question around that is, though, like I think a lot of Muslims recognize that, but I think they avoid taking one step further and saying, perhaps we need to have a using a cookie cutter approach is simply not going to work.
Yeah.
For European American converts and African American converts and born Muslims from all different backgrounds. And that's part of the reason that we kind of formed this organization.
So actually, one of the things which you highlighted was the propaganda TV and stuff like that. What's going on TV movies. A few years ago, we had an open house at our masjid, and we invited the city council and police officers and everybody. And it just so happened a few days before the event, we started getting threats from a local guy who is a guy of European descent, white guy, started threatening the masjid. And I'm like, you do realize we're gonna have the mayor. The mayor's supposed to come. The police is supposed to be there. Multiple police have this. I was like, do you think it's the right time to be threatening us? And what's it called? And so since the police officers knew that there were going to be multiple local personalities there, they sort of like took it upon themselves to make sure he doesn't do that. And but when we had the event, I gave a talk, and one of the things which I emphasized was Hollywood has done a great job of villainizing Muslims from the early days of when they started making movies, and they would have Arab sheikhs who would come to America and they would hang out with women, and they would have harems and things like that, where they villainize Muslims. So if a person of European descent does become Muslim, instantly their family thinks that they're going to become like that, what they saw on TV or what they've been seeing on TV. And it really gives a bad image that if you go to your family and say, I become Muslim, and they're like, oh, so you've become, you're going to marry 10 wives and you're going to do this and you're going to do that. And instantly all these bad things come to mind.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's, when I was growing up, we watched movies like Executive Decision and True Lies. And, like you don't, when you're that young and you've never met Muslims before, I mean, it just flies completely under the radar. Like you don't even realize that they're Muslims, especially, when you're a kid. So like, like I went back and watched Executive Decision, and, the guy's reading from the Quran while he is hijacking a plane and, all this, nonsense. So, that really flies under the radar. But I will say though that, for us, whose entire family and community is, Europeans mostly, with some exceptions, when we convert to Islam, you see a wide range of reactions, ranging from positive to neutral to negative. So, and this is, supported by, statistics, when they take a look at like, attitudes towards Islam, in Western countries, you could say that's around the 50-50 mark. And the way that we look at these polls is, 40, 60, 50 something percent of Westerners have a negative opinion of Islam. And then, like, I can understand why Muslims would look at that and, be extremely frightened. But, there's another 40 something percent, or maybe, 50% that have a positive view of Islam. And, like, we know this because, when we converted, my family had no problem with my conversion. In fact, very few people put up a stink about it. So, like, it depends on the convert, but I would say in general that, it's important to keep that in mind. But I totally understand why Muslims who are, like, who don't interact with the Anglosphere very much, would have a very, I guess, low opinion of people in the Anglosphere, and think that most of them, just hate Muslims, whether or not, I mean, they, that's because of propaganda, or, just because they don't know them very well. I mean, that's just something that, like, you're not going to be able to, you might be able to convince them, but again, it's a very difficult task. I remember, when I was I went to one Muslim wedding, and this was in a small city, where I just moved to. And, the imam, I was talking to him, and, he said straight up, like, these people, they don't like us here. And, like, I thought in my head, no, that's a really absolutist statement. I mean, I tried to convince him, like, it's not that bad. I mean, like, I know that there are people who don't like Muslims. But, like, my family had no problem with it. Like most people that I talk to, they respect Muslims, or they know them. But he just wouldn't have, it was just impossible to try to convince him, because, he just doesn't, it's difficult for him to interact with the greater non-Muslim community. So,
Mm. So tell me, what is Islam4Europeans about? Is it some sect? Is it some cult? What's going on here? Are you guys
well, it's
are
not,
you guys are you guys advocating for us to only eat burgers at iftar or lasagna? What is this?
oh, on the contrary, no, I want all masters to keep the food that they cook. I'm anti Western hegemony, like forcing people to change their culture. No, well, Islam4Europeans, it's an organization for, created by Muslims of European origin, either in Europe proper or in the European diaspora, for both born Muslims and converts. And one of our main goals is to advocate for European Muslim subcommunities throughout the Anglosphere. So what I mean by that is that we, band together in the same way that, Muslims from all walks of life have done throughout the West. And, you see in every metropolitan city, there's organizations and masjids and restaurants, that are geared to and run by, people from, a Muslim subculture. But they don't disallow anyone from coming in, because they have problems that are specific to their community and the people that they're around. So, we, advocate that, we should collectivize for several aims, and not just for, so we can survive, but also for the betterment of the greater Muslim community and the West at large. So, again, we would still maintain ties with all of our brothers and sisters. We will still fulfill all of their Islamic rights, as Allah has commanded for us to all hold the rope of Allah together. In fact, we advocate to even strengthen, those relationships, and giving salams to every Muslim that we see on the street. But by doing this, by us collectivizing, basically, our aim is to more effectively accomplish several objectives. One is to be able to more effectively preach the message of Islam to our fellow Europeans, while dispelling the myths and misconceptions about our faith. Number two is to foster an environment where it would be easier for Europeans to learn about Islam, to convert to Islam, and stay within the fold of Islam. And all three of those, as as we discussed previously, is very difficult.
Yeah.
Number three is to create an authentic European Islamic subculture, whereby we discard the un-Islamic, degenerate aspects of our culture,
Mm.
while keeping the good aspects. And this is in line with the Islamic concept of urf, as you know. Number four is to lower Islamophobia. in the Anglosphere. This is a really important task that I think we didn't, do effectively because we haven't been collectivizing, because we're just these single individuals that are out there, either in big cities or in these small towns. It's very difficult to try to turn the tide as a single individual, right? And five, and this is related to lowering Islamophobia, is to advocate for the safety, well-being, and success of all of our Muslim brothers and sisters throughout the West, while at the same time not acting as their saviors or their spokespeople. So,
Hmm. It's alhamdulillah, it sounds good. So you're not trying to replace biryani at masjids. We're good with that.
oh no, by all means. I mean, I'm completely opposed to that. I love biryani.
He loves biryani, so we're good. I think all the points we can take. If we, 6 pointers, we love biryani, we're good. So what's it called? We're all in favor. Say aye. So I think we're doing good over there. I think biryani has become a staple. It doesn't matter what subculture you come from. If you come to a masjid and there's biryani, everybody can get along and eat together.
Yeah, yeah, and
And
I think we've basically had two voices that have been our detractors. One is the far left, like the liberal SJW left wing Muslims,
yeah,
who think that all white people are racist, and and those people are very hard to. It's a very tough nut to crack. I'd be willing to talk to them. I mean, to tell them that this would solve all of your grievances. But the second voice is basically what I call the monocultural approach. And this is the approach that I had for several years
yeah,
in thinking, and it's it's a powerful way of looking at things, because I think Muslims, as the reason why they think the Ottoman Empire fell was because of nationalism, and a lot of Muslims have been oppressed by their own governments in countries by nationalist governments. And then we have the the ahadith from the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, which is vehemently against nationalism. So their approach of saying, we should just get rid of the idea of just downplay any differences that we have altogether, and just be one, ummah, monocultural ummah. That has been like the other set of detractors, and I knew that they would be, completely against this. But I think that looking at the West right now, it's kind of a short-sighted approach.
Hmm. So no, I completely understand. Like I said, for a lot of us coming from the backgrounds, like I was born and raised here, but even then, I come from a very heavy Pakistani background. Both my parents are from Pakistan. My dad lived here for a while, and he saw the dangers of society here. And obviously they were very strict on me, so I didn't turn out, I guess, like a bad apple or something like that. So coming from that perspective, a lot of times it was really confusing understanding this perspective. Like when somebody becomes a Muslim, whether they're white or black, they're expected to change their name, they're expected to change their dress, and they're expected to completely change to an extent who they are and become Muslim. I'm just gonna put it out there, like become Muslim, yeah, and fit in with the community. That's what it is. And some of them may adapt a Pakistani identity of sorts. Some may adapt an Arab identity of sorts. Different things like that. And I understand when you're trying to completely shed your previous identity. We're humans. You can't do that. You can't just shut it off and be like, okay, well, now I go from Bob to Abdullah, and everything's gone now. Everything's gone. You still have family. You still have people. You go to work. You can't just completely turn around and be somebody else. It doesn't work like that. And maybe for some time, 2 to 3 months, 2 to 3 years, it might work out. After that, a fatigue sets in where you're like, oh, okay, well, this isn't really working out. I've completely shed who I was, and there's sort of people from my past who I still want to associate with. How do I do that? And
Yeah.
trying to navigate that is not really easy if you've tried to shed everything.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the pudding is in the proof. I mean, historically and in contemporary times, whenever Muslims have allowed a new group of converts to keep all the halal aspects of their culture and just get rid of the bad things, it's been enormously successful. I was reading, I don't know if you saw my video on the spread of Islam in the world by Dr. Thomas Walker Arnold.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Um,
that was good. That was a good video.
yeah, it's a great book. They should re-release it. It's very difficult to find. But just as a perfect example, Crete, the Greek island of Crete used to be 50% Muslim,
I didn't
50%
know that.
Christian.
I didn't know that until I
And
watched your video.
yeah, I didn't know it either. And you think about it, and during the Ottoman Empire, when tensions between Greeks and Turks was at like an all-time high, when people visited Crete, they could tell no difference between the Christians and the Muslims. They all dressed the same. Oh, excuse me. They all had the same clothes. They had the same cuisine. The language was all Greek. Whenever the pashas had to give any edict or anything, it was completely in Greek. So these were basically Greek Muslims.
Mm.
And if you can take a look just all across the board, I'll even give a contemporary example. The Muslims, the Tzotzil Muslims, there's a group of like 500 Tzotzil indigenous Mexican Muslims in
Mm.
Chiapas.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and they kept everything about the food, the clothing, uh, and they adapted Islam into their culture, and they converted to Islam en masse. So it's a no brainer. I mean, whenever you allow the people from a certain group to collectivize and produce an authentic Islam based on the traditional aspects of their culture, it resonates far greater with their family and their community. So,
I work for an NGO, and our team was actually down there working with them 2 months
oh
ago.
wow,
Yeah, and what's it called? They were, and over there's a lot of indigenous Muslims, and so they went to different communities, and some communities had need for food, some had need for bricks, some had need for cooking supplies, not the actual food, like just like different dishes and stuff like that. And they're down there, they're really struggling because they're Muslim, and I guess in a way they do get what's it called? What do you call that? There's bias against them,
mm,
and so they're struggling, and and it's beautiful. We got pictures, and there's little little Mexican boys and girls who some of them are wearing kufis, the girls are wearing hijabs and stuff like that, and then the dress they have on, the rest of it is their local dress, and it's just it's
yeah,
beautiful. You get to see it, and it was interesting, and we got to see it, and we got to see that they got help and stuff like that, and it made you feel a little bit better that there's people there, although they're struggling, they're still able to keep strong with their faith, which is amazing.
yeah, yeah, and like the Islamophobia, whether it's in the West or in Latin America or Asia or any non-Muslim country, there's different strands of it. Um, I would say that in the West, the only strand that we really see is like the Tommy Robinson, um, Jean-Marie Le Pen, um, type of kind of anti-Islam sentiment, where it's just basically Islam and nothing else. It's just Islam is bad. Islam, promotes terrorism. Like it promotes oppression of women, and it's just attacking the doctrines and the practices the doctrines of Islam and the practice and what Muslims actually do. So that's one strand. But in the West, there's another strand where the criticism is not towards Islam per se. It's the fact that it's producing a cultural shift. That that our culture is basically dying out.
Hmm.
Right. So the former, I mean, that could be addressed through education. That could be addressed through following the manners of the Prophet, peace be upon him. And that's the only type of Islamophobia you see, because the other strand, almost all of them have been completely deplatformed, and they don't, if you're not in these circles, like you don't really see that there's like this nuance. But with the other strand, where it's the criticism or the fear about Islam is the loss of culture, that can be solved by allowing the converts who do convert to Islam to keep everything about themselves, and then Islam will be seen as a universal cultural filter. So
Yeah. So one of the questions I had was, as Islam entered, it went into Southeast Asia, it went into Northern Africa, then it seeped down into Southern Africa, and then went around Africa, then it went to Indonesia, different
mm,
parts of Asia, different things like that. Now, did Islam enter Europe? And what face did it take? Like, obviously when it entered Asia, the sort of not Asia, sorry, like Southeast Asia, like Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, it sort of changed the way those people how they dressed. It didn't change the dress, but it changed the dress a little bit. Like, it's sort of like if you want to call it like Islamicized it. Maybe if the
Mhm.
shirts were shorter, it made them longer. If the women's dresses were tighter, it made them looser. Things like that did happen.
Mhm.
So did Islam enter Europe, and did something like that happen as far as Europe goes?
Oh yes, and the perfect example of this is Andalus. And most of the a lot of Muslims and non-Muslims don't know this, but the majority of Andalusians, during the Islamic era, they were native Spaniards. The people who were born on Spain, they either converted to Islam themselves or they were the descendants of converts. And there were Arabs there as well, but that means the people who are in those regions who documented this, they could tell the difference between them culturally. So that's one example. If you take a look at Eastern Europe, there are several regions that converted to Islam, not just Bosnia, but also, for example, we have the Pomaks in Romania. And if you go, if you just type in Romanian Muslims, you see that synthesis. You see that the traditional European dress was basically Islamified.
Mm,
There's also European countries like Hungary. Islam, like grew there for a bit. There was a well-known Muslim who met a Hungarian Muslim in Jerusalem in like the 11th century, and he interviewed him and said, "Yeah, we're a group of Hungarian Muslims in Hungary. The king there lets us live there, and we fight in the army because they only attack the enemies of Islam."
mm,
So yeah, so I mean, you do see this, all throughout, Eastern Europe. There are, indigenous European Muslim populations, and even, Lithuania. Lithuania is the only European country that has a halal meat council that is sanctioned by the government.
really? I didn't know that.
Yes, because Lithuania's Muslim population is almost entirely indigenous.
Hmm.
So they're either Tatars who acculturated over centuries, or they're Lithuanian converts.
Hmm.
So it's so much so, and that's it's so much so that other European countries that have a large Muslim population actually have to import halal meat from Lithuania, because the Islam is so integrated that even though they're a small percentage of the population, it's almost like they know their society so well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a lot more tolerance than countries which promote freedom, like France and Greece, who are trying to ban halal and kosher meat. Who are like, oh well, it's mean to the animals, but running them through a machine is okay. Um.
Yeah. I mean, and again, France is Islamophobia central. Like, I'm not gonna deny that. And definitely that anti-Islam sentiment exists, and same thing with Greece as well. Um, but even with those areas that had Muslim populations, I mean, the way that they survive was that synthesis. So there's always going to be haters. I mean, there's always going to
Yeah.
be people who don't like Muslims, especially in Europe. You know, I guess the big question is, what do we do about that? Do we just condemn the entire country, and make your profile photo the flag of that country with the big red X through it, or put like their national monument with a bunch of Arab minarets around it and saying, this is going to be that country in 10 years. I mean, I understand. And there are Muslims who do this all over social media. And look, I get it. I mean, Muslims are frustrated. They have every right to be angry. I mean, if they don't interact, with the Anglosphere on a constant basis, the only white people they see are going to be trolls on social media, and the people who like shout things at them on the street. But I would say that if you're going to be a da'i, specializing in giving dawah to the West, I memes like that are pretty counterproductive, I would say.
So what's it called? One thing is transition, where people convert to Islam, embrace Islam,
Yeah.
and a lot of times it's difficult to deal with their families. Their parents might become difficult to deal with. The Muslim community tries to be nice. they're nice for a few months, and then people sort of like, okay, well, now you're Muslim, you've been Muslim for like 8 to 10 months, now you got to figure it out on your own. And one of the things which I've done even with Imam John, I told him, I was like, I try to keep a line of communication where I try to call all the converts I know once a month, and try to make sure they're doing okay, and just ask them, do like a wellness check. And that's just me. That's personally how I
Mm,
feel about it. It's like I should keep up with them at least,
mm,
to make them feel like somebody cares from
mm.
from the community. How can we help them out? Like, obviously coming from an ethnic background, how can we help them out? And then how can somebody like yourself, how could you help them out? How do we make it easier?
Well, and that's wonderful. May Allah reward you for your efforts for reaching
I
out to
mean, I mean,
converts, because it can be a very lonely time or a very lonely experience. Um, I think the main most important thing for converts is improving their relationship with their family. But a lot of times our family, doesn't want to talk about Islam. I mean, they have Islam fatigue. They don't want to hear about it. Like they don't want people don't even like talking about religion, let alone Islam. So, like the best, the people who are the best at presenting Islam through their actions and who are willing to insert themselves into those communities, those people should be given the resources to take on that endeavor. So, and every case is different. I think
hmm
what mosques can do now is, take an approach where, it's on a case by case basis. Like you get converts, their own kind of space, even if it's just an office space, to the side. And, we basically run, the a convert care, like center where, we assess each convert and we, ask them, how's the relationship with your family? Have you told your family that you're Muslim? Are you hiding it? Who knows? Like who would be willing to talk to a Muslim? Who would be, or is it a case where, like it's the fact that you don't know many Muslims who are willing to, like hang out with you in those spheres? Because let's be honest, a lot of Muslims, they don't feel comfortable going to our houses. Like there's alcohol, there's dogs. I mean, like I know a lot of Muslims are terrified of dogs,
I am.
and just it's not about what will happen, but what could happen. And I think if imams and Muslim community leaders, if they're not willing to insert themselves in those spaces or be willing to talk to their families off mosque, I think that's perfectly acceptable. I mean, we can't expect them to do that. But if you're not going to be ready to do that, then you need to be able to delegate that task to somebody else.
hmm
And then that way, like hopefully, inshallah, we can, like improve the situation with their family. So I think they need to delegate the task to the converts themselves. They need to have their own space, and preferably not in a mosque, because a lot of our non-Muslim family and friends, even if they have a positive image of Islam, they don't want to go to a mosque. They're terrified. And for a lot of mosques, a lot of masjids, they want to help out, but their way of helping out is everything has to be done at the mosque. We have to have an
Yeah.
open house at the mosque. We have to have a dinner at the mosque. And you're only going to attract the people who have a positive image of Islam to begin with.
Yeah.
You're not going to get to the people who like have a negative opinion of their son or daughter's conversion. And you're just, and the best people who are able to do that are ones who've gone through years of doing that. I mean, I have a lot of life experience in not, in talking to those people, those non-Muslims, but you don't mention anything about Islam. It's a long drawn out process, but that's one of the things that they can do, I think. Yeah.
I see. That's very interesting. Like, I know a lot of times our communities, like, they're still up and coming, and a lot of communities are well to do, but a lot of the communities are still up and coming, and they're trying to create like a hall or a center, like, uh, you know, separate from the masjid where people can come in, and it's not a religious atmosphere. It's just like a normal hall where they can hold events like that. But there's a lot of struggles in communities and a lot of politics and stuff like that that go into it.
Mhm.
And you've been Muslim, I think, at this point long enough to know the politics that are involved. They're quite confusing at times. So I think we just have to keep trying to create a space where people can be comfortable being themselves and people can be comfortable coming to the masjid. So
Yeah.
I actually had a friend at the open house. He came. and he's a very good friend of mine. He's not Muslim, very supportive of Muslims. He's always been supportive of me. What's it called? Love him like a brother. He's a really great guy. He came to my wedding. He's been to the masjid many times. So he came for the open house, and he came and he was wearing shorts. And we didn't. I'm okay. No problem. Come in. So the kids were sitting there, young kids, they kept laughing at him. And so he asked me afterwards. He's like, "Did I do something wrong?" Because there were two kids sitting there. They kept laughing at me. I knew who the kids were, and I scolded them afterwards. And I was like, "No, no, it's fine." I was like, his shorts were, even on a different note, shorts were pretty long. They weren't like short shorts or anything like that. And I told this kid, I was like, "Look, he's not Muslim." I was like, "You don't have to give the guy such a hard time and tease him about it." I was like, but a lot of times the masjid space becomes very, very religious, and it becomes hard to get
Mhm.
people to come in because of that.
Well, I mean, one way of looking at it is, we need to change, the way the mosque does things. We need to change the way Muslims think. We need to change their behavior patterns. Um, that's how I used to think about that. We're not being accommodating enough when they come into the mosque. But that is such a tall order. I mean, a lot of it is not about what will happen, but what could happen. And if you have Muslims who just hate, I mean, I'm sorry, if you have Muslims who are just don't know how to behave, in bringing their guests in, I mean, like, you can only do so much, like, and bring into the mosque. I mean, it's inevitable. People are going to act the way they act,
Yeah.
and you're going to get that wherever you go. I've seen even worse cases. I mean, what you gave was a really mild example. Like, I remember at the mosque that I used to go to, they were serving food in the cafeteria in the basement that wasn't even in the mosque area, and we were next to a Catholic high school, and there was literally an old uncle that would, like, yell and scream at, like, non-Muslim women who are not dressed, appropriately, going downstairs to buy a shawarma, right? So he's one, and then one time I see him actually physically kick out a woman out of the mosque. Um, so I mean, you see stuff like that, and it just enrages you. But I mean, like, what are you going to do? I mean, are you going to police everybody? I mean, like, I mean, when I first converted, it was my first iftar, and everyone was very nice. I'm not trying to, um, demonize, the Muslim community. I would say I've had overwhelming majority of my experiences with the Muslim community have been positive. But you'd get comments every now and then that are just like really just, like,
Out
really
there.
beyond the pale. And I mean, like, there was one, the first iftar I went to, there was a guy from the Red Cross, who was invited to the mosque. He actually, like, gave a speech there. And you think in your head, like, okay, this guy is, like, putting himself out there and, going to a Muslim community. And there was this one kid, he was eating or whatever. He's eating his iftar, and he took one look at him, and he was just like, "Okay, I'm white. I don't like you." Like, so just like, damn, son. And this is like when I first converted. So I mean, again, it just was like water off a duck's back for me. But think about it. I mean, this kid, like, he probably got chased around by white people in his home
Yeah.
country. The only white people he's interacted with is like cops and like border patrol. So I mean, that's understandable. But to try to say, like, we need to change everybody's behavior to order to accommodate the rare people that actually go into a mosque, I don't know. I think it's not going to address all your issues. So.
No, obviously not. I remember one time there were kids. All the young kids. They were playing outside the masjid, and they were playing basketball. And what happened is, a dog came all of a sudden, and this dog started chasing all the kids. This is almost 10 years ago, and there was only one white kid. There's white Muslim kid, and he was running the fastest, and he was at the front. The dog passed all the brown kids, and he chased the white kid, and he tackled the white kid. And I was talking with the white kid's father, brother Dawood. That I was talking with him. It's like, what happened there? I was like, he's like, he saw the rest of the brown kids. He's like, this is common. He's like, let me go for the rare meat. So, so it's like, well, he took it in stride, obviously, and it was interesting. The dog went after the white person. I don't know why, but what's it called? No, so one of the things which you mentioned at the beginning was making sort of like a community feel for European background or Eurocentric Muslims. Will it really work? Is there some proof that it works? And I know one of the things which you mentioned to me before is when you bring this up, people are suspicious. What are you guys trying to do? Are you trying to create your own cult and things like that? Like, what is the feeling on that?
Well, I think it definitely can be successful, and I think it's much needed. And like you can't keep continuing
This, the
like
brother,
this.
sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. This is actually brother Dawood. He's
Oh,
Derek
it is him.
Robertson. He's actually watching. He's like, that was my boy, the white meat. Oh, so what's it called?
That's
But
funny.
go ahead. You were shedding
Yeah,
some
no.
light.
I think it definitely can work. I think that there's a lot of interest about Islam in the Anglosphere. There's lots of people who are interested in Islam. It's just that the conditions are not right for them to convert, because the amount of fallout they'd experience from their own family would just be enormous. But like we've gotten a lot of positive feedback from Muslims from all walks of life who think it's a wonderful idea and it's necessary. Um, and it's what we should be doing. In fact, like even Malcolm X in his autobiography said that that white anti-racists, or white people who are allies of the black Muslims, they should create all white groups, and they should focus on like preaching quote unquote anti-racism to their communities. I know at that point, like he didn't think that Europeans would convert to Islam en masse, but if you read his autobiography, that's what he recommended. And he said that we should be constantly collaborating with one another, and we should meet up and we should pray and everything together, but we both need to work on our respective communities. I think there's challenges, of course. I mean, this involves changing the whole zeitgeist. I mean, that is not an easy task, and I do realize that that's going to take some work. um but I think a lot of it is convincing you know other white converts that this is something that we need to do, not just for ourselves, but for the betterment of the entire, Muslim community. I mean, just think about if 100 white people converted to Islam, in your local community, in your city. Just think about the fallout. I mean, half of them would be kicked out by their families, especially if they're women. So
Mm,
you'd have to provide. It would be the mosque's responsibility to provide like room and board, like a new job. I mean, that's an astronomical amount of money. When half of those people being kicked out, it could have been solved. Had other people, someone like me, or some people, other white Muslims who've been Muslim for a long time, were able to sit down and have a conversation, with that convert's family at a coffee shop. you
mm,
know just that conversation right there, you could have saved the Muslim community thousands of dollars.
mm,
um and like the African American Muslims that I know, like their biggest complaint, and it's a legitimate complaint, is that when we convert, we get all the accolades, we get put on a pedestal. The Muslim community, they go all out, they roll the red carpet for us. They don't, and the accolades for the African American Muslims is not nearly as much, right? So
yeah.
and I think that part of that is, I think when they convert to Islam, the Muslim community thinks, okay, black people are already on quote unquote our side, right? Was for the white convert, it's like, this person's going to be like the new superstar. His whole family's going to become Muslim. He's going to, change, like advocate on our behalf, and then give them all these positions that he just is not qualified or ready for.
Mm,
But if you have a community approach like what we're suggesting, it just eliminates that lead. So that, we're completely against white saviorism. Like this idea that, like, the white convert is going to be like the savior for the community. I mean, we don't understand the culture of many Muslims in this mosque. I mean, we're just not. It's just something that just has not worked. So I think by fostering this, community environment, by collectivizing, like you will see, inshallah, enormous success with it. So.
so one of the other things which we had discussed, and there was a question from me, was and I know we discussed it a little bit, and you did shed some light on it, where you talked about the Caucasian Muslims and how you couldn't differentiate them between the local Christians, and then speaking about the Andalusian Muslims. Um, we had spoke about this, and you had mentioned about how on Eid you would like to encourage Muslims of a European background to adopt a more like European conservative dress, I guess.
Mhm.
Because I think one of the issues comes up is in America, specifically, I'll talk about it. You can disagree with me, that's fine. But one of the problems we have is the culture that's currently trending. If a white person does become a Muslim, they can't really conservatize their dress,
True.
because if there's a lady, and most ladies these days in the summer they're walking around in shorts and a some sort of a shirt, like a tight shirt. How conservative could you make that? Maybe make the sleeves longer and maybe make the shorts into pants, but that doesn't, like we discussed earlier, like when Islam entered Southeast Asia, it changed the dress a little bit. It entered such and such places, changed the dress a little bit. And you can see the differences when you look at the Hindus in India and you look at the Muslims in India, where the dresses are similar, the patterns are similar, but the way they wear their dress is
Mhm.
very different. So, how would you take in America or Canada and places like that? How can you get people to feel comfortable in their own skin, feel comfortable in their own dress, but it's their dress. It's not like they have to wear like a thobe or a kurta or something like that.
Yeah, I think in the European diaspora countries, it's a lot tougher. I think in Europe proper, they still have festivals, traditional European dress, so that's easily adaptable. Um, but there's a Bosnian fashion company called Keftan. I saw it in the documentary Allah in Europa. I think it was a Dutch newscaster, and he went to Sarajevo first, and he interviewed like this Bosnian fashion company, and like he looked at the dresses, and they, he said, I don't see any trace of quote unquote Islam, in these designs, and the female fashion, basically it was two sisters running it. The one sister was like, this line, we used designs from Monet, and this designs from El Greco. And then Jan was like, Monet, El Greco, it's all very European. And then the sister was like, yes, because we are European. My grandfather's European, my great grandfather's European. We're European Muslims. So they adapted a lot of this, European artistry style into their clothing. So that's a possibility. You could just adapt something on its own. I mean, you create a new tradition. I mean, with African American Muslims, we think of what they wore, like they had basically created their own dress. I mean, the men wore like, the bow tie is, like ubiquitous with, African American Islam. So, you may just need to just create something totally new out of it, like like there was one, I don't know which former Soviet republic this was, but it was Uzbekistan, but they were coming out of the shadow of the communist government, and they started practicing Islam again. And one of the sisters asked a sheikh from like Arabia, like what should we wear, because he was he was visiting whatever SSR republic it was, and he said, I don't know what what you want to wear, but how about this? You give me the money, I'll buy the fabrics you want, and then you guys can make the dresses out of it. And then they adapted their own style, so it is doable. And a lot of it, like a lot of these cultural trends, they take some time to percolate. But I think that if European Muslims in Europe proper, even if they do this, I mean, it'll be very easy for us in the European diaspora to kind of adapt the same thing. So
Mm. So what's it called? Can we do like a little house on the prairie sort of thing? You
that would
know,
work.
that would work.
That would work.
Since the day you said that, I've been thinking of that, because that was Little House on the Prairie. The dresses they wore to a certain extent were pretty conservative.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And
I,
think of it this way. I said, I mean, another way to pitch this idea, because a lot of, some born Muslims, they might look at this and they raise a few eyebrows. But if
yeah,
you think about it, this would take so much heat off, traditional Muslims who dress, from back home, because like you said, it's kind of like a rejection of Western, dress and culture and stuff. They want their kids to keep something from their identity, because the what we see now in Western culture is just very decadent, right? But if you look at it in another way, that once the Anglosphere sees that that us Euro converts, are adapting dress from our ancestors,
hmm,
Islam it would take a lot of the heat off the Muslim kids, and they wouldn't feel uncomfortable wearing what they want to wear anymore. You
yeah,
see what I'm saying? So it's not so much a rejection of Western dress; it's more of a rejection of the global decadent monoculture.
yeah. Well, see, one of the things with me is like I'll wear a thobe. I don't have a problem. I'll wear a kurta. I don't have a problem. It's just the way I was raised. I don't have a problem. And a lot of times, I've seen people who even came from overseas. They're here and there's this fear of wearing it. What if people identify me? They'll see me and then they'll judge me. I'm like, look, you're brown. They see you. They already judge you. They don't need to see your dress to be judging you if they're gonna judge you. And my mother used to go shopping all the time, and she would always be wearing her Pakistani dress and wearing a scarf. And she would have, I would say, throughout the course of her life, Allah have mercy on her, she had thousands of people who would come up to her while she was shopping and tell her they loved her dress and where did she get it. White people, black people, Hispanic people, everybody would come and they would love her dress and the colors and the flowing nature and the conservative nature where it covers the body and things like that, and they would love it. And even one time I was at Walmart with a friend, and I was wearing this a thobe, and it had like this seal on it like this. And this guy comes up to me, he bows to me, and then he leaves. And it was the most absurd thing I've ever seen. I was just buying some lights or something, and this guy was with me, my friend and my friends. This guy comes up to me, he bows down to me, and then he leaves. And I was just like caught off guard. I was like, I wasn't expecting this. I was just at Walmart shopping, and I was at Walmart. So alhamdulillah, in our town, it's a smaller town. We probably have like 300, I think, total Muslims, 400 Muslims, but a lot of Muslims work at Walmart. So the other day I went to the Walmart on the other side of town. We have two major Walmarts, two super centers. I went to the other Walmart, and I wanted the brother who runs the Vision Center. He's African American convert Muslim. He was there. I went. I said salam to him as I was leaving. There was another lady. I don't know if she was Arab or Pakistani. I said salam to her as I was leaving. Today I was at the other Walmart. There was a convert black sister who works here, and as I was leaving, I said salam to her. So it was a nice experience, just being able to meet Muslim people on your way in and your way out. But getting back to the topic is like clothing wise, I don't have a problem wearing it, and I'm not afraid to wear it. And if somebody minds, it's okay, they can mind. But at the same time, you see, I'll be wearing a shirt, I'll be wearing pants, but my jeans are loose. I don't wear tight jeans. That might be the fact that I'm a little bit overweight, but aside from that, even when I'm skinny, I don't. And shirts, I always wear loose shirts. I don't wear skin tight or fitting shirts because I don't believe in wearing clothing like that. I feel like it's immodest and it shows off too much. That we shouldn't do that. And and a lot of times people are like, well, why do you wear this or why do you wear that? And I'm like, look, you guys might think that's style. I'm like, you guys can keep your style to yourself. I'm okay wearing loose clothing because I know even if I'm wearing pants and shirts, if I'm wearing it loose, I'm able to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because we shouldn't be wearing tight fitting clothing to show off our bodies and assets and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's many people, in Western society that are just, really put off by, the kind of dress that people are wearing, men and women. And they see, Muslims as, keeping their traditions, and, they are impressed by that. And it's not just Muslims, but I mean, like if you look at, religious communities in North America, like, the Amish or the Mennonites, they sort of are enthralled by it. I mean, to them, it's like, it's very impressive, and very, like a rejection of the global monoculture. And I think this counterculture kind of element to, Islam is actually, it's tough to see, but when you involve yourself, with, in debating and discussing with, the anti-Islam right, or or the European right, like a lot of them respect the fact that Muslims are actually, keeping those traditions. So it's, I know that's it's kind of hard to believe, but like in essence, like they do have a lot more respect for Muslims who keep the faith as opposed to the ones who are selling out. So
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it should be respected when you know you try to keep your identity. Like we can't, like that was one of the things when you mentioned it. The thing about it is you can't completely shed or sell out your identity because that's who you are.
mm,
And Islam, wherever it went, it never took over people's identities. It did change certain elements, and like you said at the beginning, take out those haram elements from our culture and our lives,
mm,
and you know, and keep the good elements. And
mm,
it's not to say, obviously, America is a very confusing country, especially right now.
yeah,
But it's not to say if you live in the South that there aren't good Southern qualities of people. They're very hospitable. They might. I'm going to tell you something. they might not like you because you're a Muslim, but they'll still feed you because you're their guest. It's sort of
Mhm.
like that whole Medina quality where they would go to war with people in the throughout the course of the day. The people would bombard them, and at night they would still take food out to them, and they would say, "You're still our guest." Sort of like that, where they might not like you, but they'll still be nice to you, and it's really
Mhm.
weird. Um, so and I've seen a lot of stories and heard a lot of stories about people in the South who became Muslim, and they'll be going to football games, and football is big in the South. They'll be going to football games, and they'll be standing on the side praying and stuff like that, and it's a white American Muslim, and for people, they're like, wow, that's so different, and then they'll get curious, and they'll start asking questions. But it's the beauty where you can maintain your identity but still be a Muslim. And I think that's basically what Islam for Europeans and yourself you're trying to advocate for, is don't shed you don't have to shed your identity because your identity isn't foul.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And um, we're living in a multicultural society now. I mean, it's the world is becoming far more global, and it's difficult to keep who you are because everyone has become socially atomized now. Especially in the West. I mean, you feel it really more intensely because these a lot of these communities have just been sort of like moved away. No one really sticks together anymore. People are getting married from like different parts of the country. People are being separated from their families, so it's a very different and difficult time. So I mean, keeping something in which you're staying with that community, because we're social creatures. I mean, we collectivize based on shared language and heritage and culture. But that doesn't mean that we can't be united as Muslims. And I think one of the challenges that the ulama need to address is how do we address that? Because right now I don't think there's any dissident voices saying that people need to collectivize on the basis of culture, because this is just the reality. I mean, even in small cities, like where Muslims will open up a big masjid, say from like the South Asian community. After a couple of years, even if there's just 100 Muslims, the Arabs will branch off and build their own masjid, even in a city of like 43,000 people. So, and they still go to like they still go to weddings together, they still go to Eid prayer together, but in order to, culture does not exist on an individual basis. And I think that's the other next step that the Muslim community needs to take, and that's going to be a difficult one. But I think that allowing to give converts those spaces, like they'll be able to more effectively give dawah to their people, and eventually, once those groups become more bigger and more tight knit, they can create their own marriage networks. So they can marry within the same culture, and it statistics have shown that it's those couples tend to be more compatible and more in sync, and tend to have stronger families. So
Yeah, I mean, we didn't even cover that topic, and it's fine. We don't really need to get into it. That can be a whole different podcast unto itself. But last year, I did a podcast with the sheikh who's from Pakistani descent, and one of the topics which we discussed was the
kafa.
fact that converts have a very hard time getting married. And he actually had a discussion in his masjid. He's an imam, and he's also doing his master's in computer or software engineering. He's a really smart guy. He's based out of Pennsylvania. And he was saying one of the converts came up to him and he said to me, he's like, Sheikh, we have a hard time getting married. He's like, people will be like, yeah, get married, no problem. He's like, then you go to ask for the hand of marriage for their daughter from an ethnic background. I'd be like, no, I want my daughter to marry an Arab or a Pakistani if they're from that descent. And he's like, I'm a good practicing Muslim. I've been Muslim for a few years, and it just becomes hard. And they're like, no, we don't want somebody from a white background, and your family won't understand and stuff like that. And it's just so hard. And so I can completely understand getting married from somebody from a similar background where you can even share a lot of the experiences and struggles. And that's one of the things about it, is not to say that you can't get married from somebody from a different background. That should be encouraged. But if you're having a hard time, or a lot of times it may be easier to get married to somebody from the similar background so you can associate with each other and share the struggles and understand each other.
Well, I mean, I'll tell you right up front. I mean, and I've been Muslim for 18 years. Most of the
Alhamdulillah.
marriages I've seen in which a convert married a born Muslim ends in divorce.
Mm.
usually very ugly divorces. That's not to say that it cannot work out, but it's normally the exception and not the rule. And I think the problem goes very deep, because for a lot of born Muslim communities, as the way that they try to find a spouse, for their son or daughter is to ask around in the community,
Yeah.
to investigate, is this person going to be compatible for my son or my daughter? And then they'll meet up and things. But so right from the get go, your father or your uncle will know all this information about this other person through the grapevine, right?
Yeah.
And that replaces the investigative process of in the West, where people date. When people think about, when you tell people how Muslims get married, a lot of them are just, they're puzzled because they say, well, how do you find out if you're going to be compatible with the person? Because normally we find out if they're going to be compatible through dating. But that contains a lot of problems too, because like lust gets involved. But with this, for born Muslim communities, this is their way of getting around that, which is often more effective. But when you try to copy and paste that method onto converts, it doesn't work, because we don't know anyone in the community. So you can't just use the same process, because we don't date, so we can't find out about the compatibility of that person that way. And we don't know, we have no way of investigating because we're complete outsiders.
Yeah.
So it's like taking a fish out of water. And like there's a video you can watch from an Israeli YouTuber. His name's Corey Gil Schuster. He interviews Israelis and Palestinians, and he interviewed Palestinians from Al-Quds, from Jerusalem.
I've seen it. I've seen it. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So he asked Palestinians, like, would you marry someone from Gaza or Hebron? And most of them said no. Actually, all of them said no, because the culture is too different. Even if all the barriers were removed, because so if Muslims from an adjacent country or from another city don't even want to marry each other, because the cultures are too different. What makes us think that a convert is going to be compatible with a born Muslim that they barely know? And I know these are sensitive topics, because look, we haven't had the opportunity to marry another white convert, because these communities don't exist. So I mean, most white converts have married out into Muslim families, and honestly, I don't blame them. But the ironic thing is, paradoxically, the more that Europe hates on Islam, the less likely it is for European converts to marry each other. So it's actually, their anger towards Islam is actually worse for their demographic situation, believe it or not. So that's the paradox. No one has really presented to them.
Mm.
Like other, parts of the world, if they didn't have much of a problem with Muslims, it wasn't a problem with their demographic situation at all. So I know these are controversial issues, but I mean, it is what it is.
There's no harm in shedding a little bit of light. I think there's enough controversy out there for us to poke a little bit around. But like, I've been giving Jummah on marriages, and one of the things which I discussed was dating. And the thing about dating is, until you don't get married to somebody, or you live with them, I don't want to endorse living with somebody outside of marriage, but until you don't live with somebody, you really don't get to learn about their habits and how they really are. When you go on dates, you go on your best behavior. You look your best. You act your best. You even practice how to use a fork to go on a date. So that's not a realistic sample size, essentially. And if you're living with somebody with no strings attached, where there's no marriage or there's no real commitment, it's also the same thing. You're going to try to be your best so you don't piss them off, so things don't go wrong. Everything's going to be hunky-dory. But when you're married to somebody, or you're in a committed relationship, like actual commitment, which Islam endorses, via nikah. What's it called? I think my son fell asleep. But but when you get into that process, it makes it so much more serious and so much more realistic. And when it's realistic, all the parameters change, all the inputs change, and then all the outputs due to that are going to change. And that's one of the things which I explain to people. I'm like, you say, well, in Islam we can't date and stuff like that. I'm like, until you don't marry the sister, you're not going to know what she's like. Or until you don't marry the brother, you don't know what he's going to be like. you can pretend all you like, and this is even in ethnic people like Pakistani who are born in America and raised in America. It's like, until you think that this Western style of dating and stuff like that works. I was like, look, even up until the 1800s, people arranged their children's
It's true.
marriage, or they found a very compatible match. And I remember, I was a fan of The Big Bang Theory, and Sheldon, one of the things he used to say is, "Oh, it's wonderful getting arranged marriage." He's like, "You don't have all of these, unknowns." He's like, "Your parents arrange somebody, you get married, and you're good to go." But there's a lot of issues with that now in society now, because the way we live in multicultural societies, and where there's co-education and things like that, a- and the promotion of sexual education the way it is. I'm not saying sex education isn't needed. It's just that the way it is, it's encouraged to have sex, just be safe about it. And things like this, which really make things complicated. And
Mhm.
as you can see, I have a son, and I'm really concerned and worried about that. Um, how is he going to stay on Islam? How is he going to stay away from all of these things? So it just makes it so difficult, man.
Mhm. Oh, absolutely. And like like European non-Muslims are worried about this too. I mean, like, like I know that they tend to be a bit more liberal, but a lot of them, they just it's become so extreme in the education system, K through 12, that they want to take their kids out and like homeschool them. I remember even Lauren Southern, even she tweeted out, I'd rather have my son in an Islamic school than a public school. And this is Lauren Southern. This is like like one of the big white nationalists. So maybe Ali
Uh,
Dawa had an effect on her. I don't know.
I remember Imam John, when I had him on last week, he was telling me about the school they had in Tulsa, and one of the students, her name was Dory, and she wasn't a Muslim. Her mother was a teacher at the school, so she used to come to the school. And one of the kids told her that, yeah, you're gonna go to Jahannam, and she was crying. And later on, this girl became Muslim.
Oh, really?
She became Muslim first, as still as a child, and then her father became Muslim, and then her mother became Muslim.
Oh,
Just going to the Islamic school.
oh, really? Hey, wow.
Yeah.
Subhanallah, that's amazing.
So Imam John was like, he's like, we never encouraged her to become Muslim. We never pushed her to become Muslim. She's a kid. He's like, you can't encourage a kid to become Muslim,
Yeah.
but she did it on her own, and then her family became Muslim, and he's like, it was just amazing.
Mhm.
Um, but her mother put her in the Islamic school because she saw that the environment was better.
Mhm.
It's not to say that it's the best and without its faults. Everything has faults, but it was a more cleaner, more comfortable environment for her mother to even send her child to.
Yeah, I mean, they they'll acquiesce in a lot of these points if it means that their kids are going to be protected from like learning all these things way too fast. I mean, like,
Yeah.
so yeah.
But not to drag it out too much further, but like, is there anything you'd like to leave us with, some advice, some wisdom? The famous Robert of Canada from earlier.
Like, uh, don't be afraid to raise these questions or challenge me on them, because we're still trying to hash everything out.
Yeah.
It is a very delicate balance, and I don't like I made a good impression, alhamdulillah, with a lot of Muslims around, but there's still a lot of misconceptions about what we're all about. At the end of the day, like I want the Muslim community to be safe. Like I want the opinion of Islam in the Anglosphere to change, and that's going to take a lot of hard work. But I think that with this approach, like it's a much better model. It's going to cost far less,
Yeah.
and you're going to see dividends that we never thought we'd ever like see before. So please reach out to me at Islam4Europeans, Islam the number 4 Europeans, on YouTube. I'm also on Twitter at Robert of Canada. But I would say just keep challenging me on these points, and we need to address these issues, because like the way that it's going now, I mean, we can't just keep like thinking about reform or Islamic reform just by giving these lovely platitudes. You really have to get at the core of what's going on the ground with Muslim communities today. So that's my general advice to the public. I don't know if any had any questions in the chat or.
No, there wasn't. There wasn't. I think mostly just listening to you and trying to get a feel for what you're saying, because for a lot of ethnic Muslims it's still a foreign concept of having a European or Euro based Muslim community or society. And it's really confusing because, like I said, we've always been taught somebody walks in, they become Muslim, we change their name, we give them a few dresses, Islamic dresses, and we give them few Qurans and books, and then we teach them how to become a Muslim, and then they just fit right in. That's the imagination. Um, and it doesn't come to fruition a lot of times, and you see a lot of people, they come and then they leave and you never see them again, and you may not have their
Yeah.
phone number even to contact them.
Yeah, I mean, another thing that's an interesting facet too, because like when we talk about attrition rates of converts, and that's
Yeah.
really a sad thing. I think the learning curve is and the expectations that are placed on converts is also very steep, because we think that when someone converts to Islam, they're going to be like fully practicing and like reforming the whole community and be super pious. But really, what's happening is that only the people who are super pious and have like like a stable family environment, only those are the ones who convert to Islam and actually join a Muslim community. I mean, there's a lot of people who would convert. It's just that these things take time. Nobody becomes a practicing Muslim overnight, and they may never become one. Our goal
Yeah.
shouldn't be to create like these super pious converts. Our goal should be to facilitate that process, so they feel comfortable being a Muslim, and then they start to feel more comfortable within their own faith. So I think I understand that the knee-jerk reaction to this is like anywhere from confusion to fear, but I think this is definitely what needs to happen. And then inshallah, I mean, I know this. I mean, a lot of Europeans, trust me, it'll be like flipping a switch. I mean, their opinion of Islam will just like it'll change overnight. It'll it'll pay dividends for the Muslim community at large, for sure.
Inshallah, inshallah. But Jazakallah khair for joining me. I really enjoyed the conversation. It didn't feel like we spent an hour and 12 minutes talking, but apparently we did. But it was quite an interesting conversation. I got to learn a lot. Although I had heard a few of the things, but you shed a little bit more light on them, and I really appreciate your time. Jazakallah khair, brother. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you so much for having me on, Asad. It's a pleasure to meet you.
No, no, Jazakallah khair.